right, let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Win a Pageant podcast. I have an extra special guest with us today that I am so thrilled to introduce you all to. So I have known Levi Roseman for about over a year now, and he is crushing the pageant industry because he is one of the only one of us who actually gives a rip about current events. And that makes my heart sing, because when somebody in your corner has an area of expertise that you do not either know or care about, that person, in this case, Levi, is able to kind of fill that gap for you. And so today I am so honored to be able to have a chance to talk to Levi because, listen, can I give you a little bit of insight into what makes Levi so spectacular? Number one, Dartmouth College graduate. Okay. Y'all heard of Dartmouth, right? This little thing called an Ivy League school. Okay. This guy is a brainiac, number one. Secondly, do you know that he actually majored in government and politics? Okay. So we have an actual expert in our midst, and he's even worked in the political sphere. Now, some of you may have heard before of this term. I'm going to sound so smart when I say this term, briefing. You know, like when you need to get a brief on, brief me quickly, just brief me on that. Right. And it's like, so can I please not have the entire story? Can I please not get all, I really just need the brief. And this is a specialty of Levi because he has done this for not just politicians, not just pageant women, although he's also worked with both of those. He's done it for authors. He's done it for his own congressperson working in Washington, D.C., and many others. And so he knows how to really take the whole picture and boil it down into what do you actually need to know so that you are able to present yourself in a way that's knowledgeable, in a way that actually shares your opinions and your values, and from a smart perspective, so that you never will get caught with that whole, like, what do you think about blah, 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 fill in the blank, the things you've never heard of before. And then you're like, I have no idea what this judge is even asking me. Levi is the guy. Okay. So without further ado, Levi, welcome to the Win a Pageant podcast. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Alycia. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Yes. You know, I loved when I first met you. I can't remember when that was. Is that like a year or so ago when I was on your show?
It was close to that.
Yeah. And I was so grateful that you had me on your podcast, and you do such a great job with that. And we had so much fun connecting then. And so being able to stay in touch with you and see all of the great successes that you have had over the last year and the impact that you are making for pageant women, you know, it's awesome. So we are really honored to have you here joining us today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I can tell you were by far my most popular pageant podcast guest. So, oh my gosh. Yeah, my listeners absolutely enjoyed that episode. And I can't thank you enough for coming on that show, even in its fledgling stages.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you having me. Hey, so let's talk current events, politics. I know you came prepared today because you always come prepared. So I'm guessing you've got, and honestly, Levi, you know, the way that I approach politics and current events is like, I believe that we do have to have insights about the world around us. We can't just stick our head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. But I also personally cannot stand watching the news. It feels negative and it feels heavy and it feels like it wrecks the rest of my life. But I know our pageant contestants do have to show up with a knowledge about what is going on in the world. And so what I think is so great is that this is an area of interest that you have, that you are knowledgeable about. I feel like I don't even know what to ask you. Like, this is how disconnected that I intentionally allow myself to be. But I know that the importance of understanding things around us. So maybe you could kind of give me, what do you feel like is the most important pieces that you want to cover with us today?
Yeah, I'd love to go over that. And I have a couple requests. If you'd excuse me, I've been under the weather. So if my voice sounds even more nasally than usual, I apologize. And then second, don't make me laugh too hard because I immediately start coughing, and that's not going to be a good thing for a podcast. But I'll try to keep my laughs silent. I'm already having trouble containing. I can be a little bit ebullient, with some of my expressions. But well, thank you for teeing me up. There's the news has just, especially in the last 6 years. I mean, really, I think since the start of Donald Trump's candidacy for president, it's news cycles have just been so hard to keep up with. Some commentators will say 1 week in the news now will span what used to take a year or two to cover, just in the breadth of topics. So right now, the things that I am seeing are most salient. I have 3 topics I'd like to go over today. Specifically, one of them being President Biden's approval rating, one of them being ongoing COVID measures as it relates to current events, as it relates to government policies about COVID, and then abortion. It's been in the news recently. It's going to be one of the biggest topics going into 2022 for reasons that I'll get into. But I was listening recently to the finalist questions in Miss USA, and it's just like the news cycle is covering a breadth of issues. I mean, I saw a question about financial literacy, then mental health, then gender equity, then anxiety specifically, racial equality, sustainability, how the pageant transformed over 7 years, and then unity and how that pageant contestant would advise political candidates today. Like, what topic would be your biggest issue that you'd like to raise with a political candidate? So I don't know that any topic's really off limits, because it just seems like any topic could come up, and it's helpful. I tried to choose these 3 topics because I think it'll give us an opportunity to talk about big framework questions that hopefully will help us understand political questions as they come up in any kind of category. Does that make sense? Is this a good direction to go?
I love it. Yes, yes, and yes. I actually really appreciate that you shared those topics, because I think oftentimes as a pageant contestant, we feel this pressure. We have to know everything and be everything. And, for that poor contestant, like, how would you advise a political candidate? And she's probably thinking like, oh my gosh, am I now all of a sudden a political advisor? Like, no, I did not graduate from Dartmouth College with a degree in politics, perhaps, and so she's probably like that, and still, we do have to be knowledgeable. Yeah. We still have to be prepared, and we still have to know these things. And there are ways, of course, one of the things I teach in the academy and in the game plan is that we got to know what we stand for. We have to understand our own values, so that then any of those questions we can still answer from your own place of values. And even if you are not a political advisor and you get a question like that, you still know what you value and how you would advise any person on anything, any topic. But having this insight to what you're describing, those big 3 things, I think this is brilliant, because it's going to set us up for Q1 of 2022. What are going to be these big topics? So let's start first. Let's unpack what you are describing about President Biden. Can we start with that one?
Absolutely.
So brief us, Levi. Give me the briefing, please.
I'll give you the briefing. I'm couching this in terms of President Biden's approval rating, because it gives us an opportunity to talk about a few different subjects. The president's approval rating right now sits somewhere around 42% on average. I mean, we've seen polls as low as 36%. Some polls have them up near 50, but the 2 aggregators that I look at Real Clear Politics or 538.com, both put him at about 42.6% approval rating, which is historically low. It's right on track with about what President Trump was looking at in this time in his presidency. But President Trump was a historically unpopular president, but one who was extremely popular among his own base. One problem President Biden's finding is he's actually losing support among his own base. Republicans already did not like him very much. Now he's losing support of Democrats and independents too, for a number of reasons. And I want to get into what issues are actually driving his approval rating down. At first, we saw it was, if you remember a couple months ago, there was a debacle in Afghanistan when we ended our formal war in Afghanistan. But as we pulled our troops out, there was a kind of a bungling of the process. A lot of our troops left before all Americans who wanted out of the country were able to get out. The Taliban ended up back in control of the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul. And there were a lot of communication errors in that process that it's kind of steamrolled this process for President Biden, where he started to see his approval rating dip from, he started his presidency close to 58% approval ratings, dipping down 50, and we saw it go underwater under that 50% mark with Afghanistan. Well, that's far in the rearview mirror. That's not likely to even be a topic in next year's midterm elections, just because of how fast these news cycles are moving. But then we saw an immigration crisis at the border. We saw an influx of just too many migrants, too many asylum seekers to handle for our immigration systems at the border. Now, many people saw this as President Biden's fault explicitly because he repealed a couple regulations of the Trump presidency, one being the Remain in Mexico policy, where migrants had to remain in Mexico while their asylum claims were being adjudicated. Well, when President Biden removed that stipulation, we saw a major influx. And so, increase in COVID cases, of course, but increase in humanitarian crisis at the border because there just weren't enough people to process the asylum seekers. So many people placed President Biden squarely to blame for those immigration policies. He actually just reinstated that Trump era policy called Remain in Mexico because a couple of states sued him, and they kind of figured out that was one of the ways to control the major immigration influx. Yes.
Levi, I'm just going to push pause for a moment because I want to just tell those that are listening, I want to give them a moment to get out some paper and a pen, because the things that you are sharing are really key, and you're sharing some, there's a lot. This is, I think, why people, pageant women, feel overwhelmed by one question. And it's because every one question is tied to, as you're sharing, all of these other, it's a ripple effect. And so I want everybody to grab a piece of paper and a pen and start writing some of these things down, because what Levi is sharing is the picture of the ripple effect of these events happened, and therefore this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it's no one thing is, you can't just know the one thing. And that's why these things become complicated, because there's a lot of stuff coming into play. So I just want to give people a moment to grab a paper and a pen if they haven't already. So, and I'm sure as you were talking, everybody's like, oh my gosh, wait, hang on, I got to write this stuff down. So I'm kind of just giving them a moment to get it together and get out that paper and pen, whip out your notes app, something, because this stuff is useful. And it's great to have these keywords and these things that you're describing that maybe we've never heard of before. I know I haven't in many cases. So, okay. So continue. This is good stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I will try to keep it as digestible as possible. And I'm glad that you brought up values earlier, because I'm going to try to tie most of these topics back to values, because I think that's a nice heuristic or brain shortcut for if we can tie back, if we can really prioritize what our values are, then we can start to think about, okay, which of these political issues are important to me? Would I say that I approve of President Biden's handling of the presidency? And that's going to tie back to values. So I promise I will get there on this issue, and we'll really see that when we talk about abortion. Okay, so Afghanistan and immigration originally drove down President Biden's approval rating. We were expecting it to jump back up because those seem to be kind of transitory, so short-lived news issues. His approval rating never jumped back up. It's actually been on a steep decline ever since. And what seems to be driving that now is the economy, the handling of the economy. Because what we're seeing right now is not poor economic conditions by any means. The economy is growing. People are heading back to work after the pandemic. But right now, the major issue, and one that's going to continue far into the future, is inflation. And inflation, real simply, is just when you go to the gas pump, I've just moved up to New Hampshire 4 or 5 months ago. I remember when I filled up my gas tank, $40 or something like that. Now, okay, it's $50. That's inflation. When you check out at the grocery store and you look at the receipt and go, that's a lot more expensive than it used to be. That's inflation. There are a couple things driving that. Mostly as it relates to supply and demand. Right now, there's a supply problem because of this thing called the supply chain. There's shortages in workers being able to provide our goods and services right now, just because, one, maybe they were laid off during COVID and never came back to work. Maybe they're not happy with the wages they were being paid. So there's a shortage of supply and services here in that case. But there's also a whole lot of money going into the economy right now. So we're seeing a lot of spending packages by Congress and by the president in the tune of trillions of dollars. So there's a whole lot of money going into the supply, but the supply of goods and services isn't increasing along with that money, which means that a whole lot more dollars are being spent to buy the same amount of products, which means that those products are then much more expensive for us. Now, why I bring this up, especially as it goes into 2022, is because the Federal Reserve, so one of the major government bodies that deals with monetary policy, recently released a statement that this inflation is no longer transitory, no longer short-lived. It's going to be here to stay. It's going to take pretty major government intervention to do anything about it. So we're likely to see this for years going into the future. And the second reason why I bring it up is because President Biden has achieved a couple pretty impressive wins recently, one of which being the infrastructure package. So there's a big bipartisan meaning both Democrats and Republicans voted for it, effort to increase spending on infrastructure. So on roads and bridges, things like that. Only about 30% of the bill actually will go toward hard infrastructure like that, but it's beside the point. Achieving a bipartisan win in today's climate is majorly impressive. President Biden's problem in this case, though, is it was a multi-trillion-dollar package. So that even his wins right now are going to increase inflation. Even his wins right now are going to, somewhere down the road when we hit the midterms, or if he's running for re-election in 2024, they're actually going to come back to bite him. So his wins right now are going to be short-lived and only increase these economic issues that we're seeing. And we're seeing economy once again being listed as voters' top concern. It used to be COVID. Now only about 20% of voters list COVID as their top concern. More like 30-40% are listing the economy as their top concern. And folks, it's not likely to get better anytime soon.
Wow, this is good. I feel like I need like a glossary. Like I need bipartisan, inflation. I mean, I know what some of these things mean, but I'm sure there's like a ton out there. I don't know what they mean. But I love this breakdown of what is actually going on and how everything is affecting everything. You know what else I'm picking up here, Levi, is that, and this is something probably perhaps people already know, is that oftentimes the current events are often current because of the political landscape in terms of when elections happen. And so as you are describing this, you're saying like, oh, well, here's why this is important now because of this next election cycle coming up, and things that are current that are happening closer to that election cycle impact the election itself. And so there's a lot of other probably, chess pieces that strategies that a lot of the politicians are using in order to ensure that as we get closer to the election, things are in their favor. That's kind of the, what I'm picking up here of what you're describing. So let's transition into COVID. Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I'll try to keep this one brief because, I mean, we're all quite familiar with COVID at this point in time. But a couple of things I want to share, one being the Omicron variant, which many of us have now heard about in the news for about a week. And then vaccine mandates, especially by the federal government right now. These will be fairly brief. But as we think about values, I want, if listeners will oblige me, if you could consider values of safety and values of freedom, because they're really in tension with the issue of COVID, especially as we start to see vaccine rollouts, more widespread rollouts, and other treatments like Pfizer and Merck are releasing pills to treat COVID and then decrease hospitalizations and that kind of thing. Let's start with the Omicron variant. Omicron is a letter of the Greek alphabet. It was the next one up after our most recent mutation. Actually, they decided to skip two of the variant names for political reasons, mostly. One of the variants actually is supposed to be called variant XI. XI is the name of it, but it was. So the World Health Organization is sponsored in part by the Chinese government. The Chinese government is part of the World Health Organization. They were a little bit concerned that the Xi variant would be confused with the leader of China, the president of China, President Xi, which is spelled XI. So they decided to skip that one and go to Omicron variant. And Omicron variant
That's a good fun fact.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I'm giggling. It's like not that funny, but what an interesting insight of like, wow, that's how deep it goes. Like, but good on them for skipping that. I would hate for it to be like the Alycia variant, like that would be awful. So I'm glad that they skipped that one. So that's good.
So they skipped, that was the second one they skipped, because the first one they skipped was new, NU, because they were worried that people following the news would hear, oh, the new variant, and think that it was the NEW variant. Yes, so they skipped new and they skipped Psi and went straight to Omicron, which is much more intimidating. And Omicron, you could say in a deep voice like that. But it doesn't seem to be as intimidating from a health perspective. So it started in South Africa, and actually South African officials have been saying, yeah, it's a variant of concern just because there are mutations in the variant, but they're not seeing a whole lot of severe cases. They weren't actually even seeing many hospitalized cases. So it could be the case that this is a more transmissible but less severe variant. We can't really tell for the next few weeks, but we are seeing lockdowns in places again. We're seeing travel restrictions because the World Health Organization, the CDC, and global governments have to look at this variant and go, okay, is it going to get around the vaccines? Is it going to get around treatment? Is it going to be better? Maybe it's the case that we're going to see variants pop up that are going to start acting more and more like a common cold rather than like a deadly virus. And we expect that to be the case going forward. We just don't know when that's going to be. Maybe that'll be Omicron, or maybe Omicron's going to be the one that's going to get around vaccines. Doesn't seem to be the case. So far, it seems the vaccines are effective against Omicron. Any questions about Omicron?
That's good. No, not as of now, but I think what you brought up, I would love to talk more about is this idea of the values, because, controversial issues are controversial because there is two right answers depending on the value system that you subscribe to. And so I think that that's what you are saying here. You mentioned safety and freedom being the competing value system. And if you have a high sense for safety, and that's the higher value priority, then you will likely have a tendency to lean in one direction. And if you have a higher value of freedom, it will be likely you lean to the other direction. And so this is, I think this is a great kind of, I guess, teachable moment for everyone to see. This is why controversial issues are controversial. It's not because one is right and one is wrong. If that were the case, there would be no controversy. The problem is that there's competing morals or competing value system. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, I think that's really perfect. And it's a great frustration of mine to hear people talk about politics and they always begin the sentence. I shouldn't say always, but many people begin sentences with, I just don't understand how someone can believe X. Yeah. And this is particularly salient with COVID and abortion especially. But I always find, like you said, that's a teachable moment of, oh, I just don't understand. Well, great. Can we help you understand? Because I don't necessarily want you to agree with the other side, right. But if you can understand the other side, then we're not going to get into demonization. People have been throwing out the term civil war in recent years. Like, that wouldn't even be a topic to discuss if we could step back and go, wait, is there actually a reason, a good-hearted reason why someone disagrees with me about COVID? Is there a good-hearted reason why that person wants to wear a mask still, even though they're doubly vaccinated? Maybe safety is of utmost importance to them. And for 2 years, they felt absolutely under attack by a virus they can't even see. So anything they can do to increase their safety or increase safety of those around them, or the perceived safety of those around them, is going to be something that they want to take advantage of. Now, why is this crazy person around me? Why is he refusing to wear a mask or get a vaccine? Well, maybe he also is concerned about his safety in terms of vaccine. So there was a lot of skepticism because of how quickly the vaccines were rolled out. Maybe it's a liberty issue, and people don't want to put on what they call a muzzle anytime they go out in public, and they don't like the idea of living under fear. And we do know that fear and living in constant fear affects our mental health, and we've seen major increases in anxiety and mental health issues in the recent couple years of the pandemic. But fear actually also suppresses our immune system. So living in that constant state of fear is going to make us more susceptible to communicable or transmissible, contagious diseases like that. So, there are major issues at play here. And it's not purely a matter of, if you don't wear a mask, you hate me, or if you wear a mask, you're a sheeple. You're listening to the government like a sheep being led to the slaughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's good. I appreciate you sharing both of those sides too, to give language that supports each side, because, and it's like you said, this is the case for really, this is what it is. This is why when you get asked about a controversial issue, it's important to know your values, which is what you said at the beginning. Let's move on to abortion now, because I know that one really calls for an understanding of values. So share us about that.
Yeah, I'll talk about why it's in the news right now, and then we'll talk about abortion maybe a little bit more broadly. Right now, there's a case before the Supreme Court called Dobbs versus Jackson. And this case is likely to, or at least there's a good probability that this case will overturn Roe versus Wade, which is something that many of us have heard about. It's the landmark abortion decision in the Supreme Court. So let's back up a little bit. The Supreme Court's job is to interpret laws. The judicial branch of government interprets the laws. There's three main branches of government: judicial branch, executive branch, legislative branch. So legislative branch is Congress. They're the ones who make laws. The executive branch is headed up by the president. He's the one who executes laws. That's why it's called the executive branch. So he's the one that actually puts them into action. But the Supreme Court interprets the laws. And they interpret the laws, especially against the Constitution, which is our highest law. The Constitution protects our rights, or at least recognizes our rights as Americans. And the Supreme Court's job is to say, is this law constitutional? Does it violate anybody's fundamental rights? So Supreme Court ruled a long time ago, back in the 70s, in Roe versus Wade, that women have a fundamental or constitutional right to an abortion. So abortion is listed nowhere in the Constitution, but they derived it from mixing a bunch of amendments, that there is a general right to privacy in the Constitution. Again, that's not in the text of the Constitution, but they kind of derived it from looking at the language more broadly. And from that, they determined there's a right to an abortion up to the third trimester. So the states can't really regulate abortion or outlaw abortion in the first 2 trimesters of pregnancy. A little while later, there was a case called Planned Parenthood versus Casey. In that case, the Supreme Court said, well, not the first 2 trimesters, but we'll say fetal viability. So if a fetus could survive outside the womb, then that's the point where states and the government can step in and say, okay, you can regulate abortion here, or you can outlaw abortion after fetal viability, which is generally accepted to be somewhere around 24 weeks of pregnancy. We've seen babies, fetuses, however you want to describe them, survive outside the womb around 21 weeks before. And so that's been the standard for about 20 years now. The case before the Supreme Court right now is questioning that, because Mississippi's actually outlawed abortion. They've passed a law to outlaw abortion after 15 weeks, which is well before viability. And so that question is one that might cause the Supreme Court to overrule Roe v. Wade, overrule the fundamental right to an abortion. Now, if that's the case, a lot of people think if Roe v. Wade goes out the door, that means abortion's illegal in the country. That's absolutely not the case. What will happen if Roe v. Wade's overturned is abortion will become a state's issue, and each state will have the ability to regulate or not regulate abortion however they choose. States like California and New York have already enshrined abortion in their constitutions. We know abortion is not going to be affected in states like those. It's protected in some cases all the way up until birth, the right to an abortion. States, especially across the South, red states, Republican traditional states, are likely to ban abortion potentially after conception, or at least after a fetal heartbeat is detectable at 6 weeks, if Roe v. Wade is overturned. Our best guesses, our best estimates are that if Roe v. Wade's overturned, abortion rates in the country will only go down by about 20%. So Roe v. Wade does not get rid of abortion. It will decrease abortion and decrease access to abortion in many states if it's overturned. Is this a helpful overview of where we're at with current abortion law?
Yeah, this is great. This is great to actually have this back information too, to know all of the insights that, again, this is why these things are so important. And Levi, you're doing such a beautiful job of giving the context to these elements that are confusing, perhaps, or, bigger than just the issue itself. All of the context is so important as well. So I appreciate you sharing that. And even the details of the states. Can I ask you this as a pageant coach? I'm curious what your thoughts, and perhaps this relates to how you might even advise a political advisor, or maybe it would be totally different. So for a pageant woman that's competing in these specific states, where, let's say California, for example, do you think that she should, in fact, um, represent, I guess, the values that the state has voted upon? Or do you think that it's more important for them to stand by what's most important to them? Like, how would you advise a pageant contestant to go about that?
I'd ultimately defer to you and your experience with this, but anytime I've coached pageant contestants, I've heard them use language like, well, I want the judges to believe this about me, or something like that. It makes me very nervous, because in my political experience, authenticity is something that's not only extremely important, it's something that almost all humans are fairly good at picking up on innately. Like, even if we can't tell quite what's up with someone, if they're being inauthentic, if they're misrepresenting what their true beliefs are, there's something grating about it. There's something that kind of raises red flags about it. So I understand the desire to potentially speak to your audience or say something that you think might be more representative of your state, or what the judges might like to hear. But at the end of the day, if you're not saying something that you truly believe and you're not holding true to your values, I think it's going to come across as inauthentic and ultimately be a strike against you in terms of your listeners or potential scoring ability. May not be the case, but I think this is another opportunity to really think about your values. And with abortion, we see values of liberty and values of life being in tension against each other. And if you're pro-life, and you talk about why life is the more important value to you, even a fetal life, even the life of an unborn baby, then I think you can start to show values that even if someone disagrees with you, you can start to see the rational basis for it, the moral basis for it. Liberties, also just one of our most important values in the country, right? Our Declaration of Independence lists life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as the inalienable rights. So liberty's in tension with life here. And if you have a liberty to control your own body in this country, that's a fundamental right. And that's a right that's important to so many women across the country, which is why many support the right to an abortion. And if you speak from that level, I think people can start to understand your moral and your logical arguments about it. Again, I'm in favor of sticking to what's genuine to your values.
I absolutely agree. I think that that's absolutely something. And, because women, pageant contestants, we are not political candidates. And so I think that you're right. That's absolutely, we are representing, but in a different way, not necessarily representing as an elected official so much as a selected official. So yeah, I so appreciate that. So Levi, I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think that I think that the women listening know that in order to be as organized as you just were to present each of these aspects, this is something that perhaps to you may come naturally, but to the rest of us, organizing something like this may have taken hours and hours and days and days and days. And so what you just did was save us literally weeks of time and research and stuff. So I am just so grateful to you for going through that process in advance and for really prepping in such an important way. So thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. I know I can get long-winded at times, but I really do enjoy talking about this kind of thing. So thank you for bringing me on.
I am so grateful to Levi. Look, he has decades of experience. He knows all of the best resources and all of the sources of where to get all this information and boil it down into such a perfect, consumable way for all of us to just get the details and understand the high level things of what we actually need to know in order to help you win your pageant. So if you are looking for more of things just like this, more briefings and understanding in depth of politics and stuff without having to find all of the resources yourself, I would highly, highly encourage you to go to lzrcoaching.com to get more information on this, okay? Thank you again, Levi. We so appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.